everyone, and welcome back to this episode of the Cycle Breaker Show. I am one of your hosts, Tiffany Toombs Clevenger, joined by my amazing husband.
Hey, Sid Clevenger, how y'all doing?
I thought he was going to forget to introduce himself there for a second.
I mean, I might have. I'm just staring at your shirt, your Hallmark shirt.
You got it. You always complain that I never wear it, so I have to wear
It's
it.
true. You are a Hallmark fanatic.
Only in the fall. There's something about Hallmark movies in the fall that just are like all warm and fuzzy and cozy. No?
I guess. I mean,
So
I guess. I don't know.
today's episode is not about Hallmark movies.
Although it could easily, you watching Hallmark movies in the fall might relate back to what we're talking about today.
Does it? I don't know.
Maybe a stretch. I don't know.
So what we are going to be talking about today is what to expect when you start breaking family cycles, because it's something we've both been through. We've had some different experiences, but even for my clients, there's typically like one or two common themes that I see. And I think it's important that we share this with people because I think being prepared for what is going to come makes it easier to navigate, right? Like if I had known I feel for myself navigating the stuff that we went through with your family was easier because I knew what to expect, because it wasn't my first rodeo.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for me, like, I know we'll talk about this on this episode, but two maybe in layman's terms when we talk about breaking family cycles. So everybody, you might be making some assumptions, and you're probably a lot of you are right. But what we're talking about when it comes to breaking family cycles is breaking generational trauma within families. So basically, things that happen over and over and over again that are not okay and gets passed down, for generations. And when we talk about, I was talking to Tiffany about this. After this happened and after I kind of got through it and was able to look at it maybe at a little bit more 20/20 vision without having a lot of emotion, after I did clearings with Tiffany on it, to be honest with you, I think I was able to look at it and say, okay, so where did this type of trauma start? And really kind of taking a look back at, for me at least, I was able to take it back all the way back to the Great Depression and possibly right before then, when life was probably a lot harder, and these kind of traditions, I say traditions, but these kind of like habits that, went from great grandfather to great grandfather, you know what I mean? Like over and over and over. And you would find the pattern that this was basically had happened over and over and over and over again. And what we're talking about is kind of like recognizing that that's not okay and breaking free from that, because all of us are close to our families for the most part, or at least think about family. For me, at least, I thought about family a lot. I grew up growing up from the South, family's everything, right? So for me, not only talk about when it's okay to break free from that, but also like when to recognize that there are certain things that might be going on within your family that are happening to you that are not okay. And you got to take a stand and just be like, this isn't okay. And I'm not going to put up with it anymore.
Yeah. And I want to preface this episode by saying that I am a believer, except in cases of actual abuse. I am a believer of setting boundaries and attempting to work with somebody before I skip to non-contact, right? Like,
yeah,
I've never, I won't say never, with maybe one or two clients who there has been extreme cases of abuse. With the exception of those two, I've never encouraged a client to go completely non-contact to start.
Well, I think
right?
with those two, just to preface, and mistake me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure with those two clients that it went beyond emotional abuse. We're talking like physical
Yeah.
abuse, right? So
There's
like,
physical abuse, sexual abuse.
yeah,
Not that makes emotional abuse okay, but I
it
want to
doesn't.
preface with,
Yeah.
this isn't going to be a show about, hey, you should just ditch your family and get rid of them. I want you to be prepared, though, for some of the things that might happen when you start to break those cycles or when you start to set those boundaries. Now, the other thing that I want you to know is that we adopt all sorts of patterns from our family. And I want to share an example that is going to seem totally irrelevant, but it shows the level of pattern that we can adopt in our families. So my grandma was born in 1927, 1928, right? So she lived through the Great Depression. She lived through World War II. She lived through the Cold War, Korean War, Vietnam War, the Vietnam War, right? All, the collapse in like the 80s and the 90s, all of that. She lived through all of that. Now, back in the days of the Great Depression, you can just wander down to the grocery store and get fresh fruits and vegetables, right? And so getting canned foods back then was a lot more prevalent. So growing up, my mom always had a pantry full of canned foods. And so growing up, we always had a pantry full of canned foods. And when I went to college, the very first thing that I did was I went out and I bought $197.50 worth of canned foods. And I'm not even joking when I say they sat in my pantry for like however, the majority of my degree.
All right. So we have to mention this because we're not just going to talk about
hold on. And then I'm going to say, but I didn't touch a single one of those canned food until I had to move out, and then I just donated it all. And then I didn't have another really canned food in my pantry until 2020, when you and I started going to the grocery store and the shelves were bare, and I started getting mass anxiety that we weren't going to be able to eat. And so I started little by little stocking up. So
yeah.
But again, you can see the pattern that
pantry. They've traveled with us to 3 states.
You can see that I defaulted back to that pattern, right? Mm-hmm. But even though like I don't eat canned foods really, unless I absolutely have to, it was a program that was ingrained into me. And so for most of us, our grandparents were born before the Great Depression, the majority of us, right? Who are, in our 30s or 40s. Now, what's also crazy is that, Sid, we'll start with me. When my grandma was 5 months pregnant with my mom, the precursors of the eggs that would eventually be fertilized and become me and my brothers were being formed in my mom. So we had 3 generations living. We had 3 generations living in one physical environment. Mm-hmm. So whatever my grandma was experiencing at that time, my mom was, I don't want to say vicariously experiencing, but was experiencing through my grandma's blood supply. Mm-hmm. And that ultimately impacted the eggs that were being formed that eventually created me. And when your Mimi was 5 months pregnant with your mom, or with both your mom and your dad, right? When your mama was 5 months pregnant with your dad, the precursors of the sperm that would eventually fertilize the egg that eventually became you was also being formed. So on both our mom and our dad's side, we had 3 generations living within one physical environment.
Yeah.
And so one of the craziest things that happens in the work that I do is that somebody will be carrying around like anger. And when we go to work back to the very root of it, they're like, this isn't even mine.
Yeah.
Right. And I've had clients who are Jewish who have experienced this, who had an ancestor in the Holocaust, right, in concentration camps. I have had clients who are Black and they had ancestors, dating all the way back to the slave trade, who have these belief systems imprinted in their DNA. So, that's epigenetics is a whole other podcast, but since we're talking about breaking generational trauma, I just thought that would be a fun little nerd out with Tiffany moment.
Factoid.
Yes. All right. So I'm sure everybody listening to this has heard the saying, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. You've heard that, right, Sid?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not necessarily limited to the 5, right? It's really like our overall environment that we're impacted by. And they make up our average, but we make up their average. So when we start to make positive change, we pull them, right? We're making the decision to step outside of our comfort zone by taking this action, but they aren't making that decision, but they're being pulled out of their comfort zone. Their average is being pulled up, and that feels uncomfortable for them. That's going to trigger their sense of fight or flight. And so the most common thing that is going to happen when you start breaking generational trauma patterns is that you are going to trigger other people's fight or flight.
100%.
And that could look like they just stop talking to you, and maybe they say something like, oh, you've changed, or oh, what, you think you're better than us now, or oh, whatever. Or they could just kind of disappear from your life, or they go into fight mode and either passive aggressively or quote unquote nicely, or even very aggressively, they might start trying to pull you back, right? The crabs in the bucket theory, that if you have crabs in a bucket and one starts to crawl out, the other ones will pull it back down. And they even did this study with monkeys. They did this cool study. Sorry, this is a total rabbit hole, but I think this is such a cool study. They had these monkeys.
Yes, the books that Tiffany reads, everybody.
They had these monkeys and they separated them into 2 groups. And in one of the cages, they gave in both cages, they gave monkeys pink corn and blue corn. But one of the cages, the blue corn was like made to be really salty and disgusting. And in the other cage, the pink corn was made to be really salty and disgusting. So over a period of a couple of days, the monkeys in the one learned not to eat the blue, and the monkeys in the other learned not to eat the pink. And then what they did once those patterns were set was they took one monkey from each cage and swapped them. And so now the new monkey would go for the blue corn, and all the other monkeys would stop them from having it. They did another study where they put monkeys into a cage and they like hung a banana at the top of the cage, and they created like a set of stairs or whatever for the monkey to go up. But every time a monkey went up to get the banana, they either like shocked it or squirted it with water. I can't remember what they did, but they did something to dissuade the monkey from getting that banana.
Or from what I remember.
And then again, over a period of time, they learned not to go for the banana. And then they would introduce new monkeys who had never been shocked and that they had no intention of shocking. And that monkey would go up to get the banana and the others would pull them back. Right. And so this is what happens in our life. People have become so conditioned and ingrained with repeating these same old patterns and habits that when we go to repeat them, or when we decide that we're not going to do it anymore, when we decide we're going to stop drinking, or that we're not going to tolerate a certain behavior anymore, that is going to trigger their sense of fight or flight. And so, they might make comments like, who do you think you are? Or what do you think you're better than me? Or I don't really know that starting a business in this economy is a good idea. Or you'd make a great receptionist, right? So they'll make these little comments and they're doing this unconsciously to plant these seeds of doubt to pull you back.
Well, I think it's interesting, so I mean, if I get out of, and, we've talked about my family story on here multiple times, which really I think was kind of like it's just interesting how it happened, because we were kind of building this business around breaking the cycle, and then that happened. And then it was just kind of like, okay, this is like the precipice, this is like the coup de grace of like what we're about. But it's interesting because I remember when I first, my story, well before what happened with my family, I was caught in negative cycles with relationships. And, and you've helped kind of show me that had everything to do with my confidence and the belief in who I was myself. Like, I didn't really have much of an identity. I didn't believe in myself at all. My self-confidence was non-existent. And, I almost expected to be treated that way. Like, in every relationship that I would get into, I kind of had in the back of my head that it was going to end poorly. And then I needed to prepare myself for that happening. So I almost got numb to the fact of being hurt, betrayed, lied to, cheated on, whatever, based on the constant repetition of what was going on in my life. And it was, definitely some fault of my own because I allowed it. Like I allowed myself to put myself in those positions because I was looking for short-term gratification instead of long-term. And and it took you kind of introducing that to me is like that's not okay. And like here's what you're doing wrong and here's how to fix this. But looking back, like one of the big things that I did was, I got divorced back in 2016, at the end of 2016. Should have never got married in the first place, but got divorced. And when I got divorced, it's funny because interestingly enough, right before I got divorced, like we're talking like just a couple of months before, that's when I started getting these ideas around becoming an entrepreneur, but I didn't know how to do that. And to be honest with you, I was told my entire life before that, you need to go get a job. You need to go get a job. What do you want to do with your life? Like this was my family, right? So like my mom and my dad mainly, and they were putting me up against, and that really, looking back, they never understood me. They didn't understand that I probably needed to be out on my own, and there was other people in the family who were entrepreneurs. And it was almost kind of like I was looked at as kind of like, no, like that's never going to happen for him. He needs to go get a job. He needs to sit in his cubicle. He needs to do what he's told. And I could go well beyond why I believe that happened in regards to being put on medication when I probably wasn't supposed to be on medication and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I remember when I moved, and I remember right before I moved to Dallas, my dad walked up into the kitchen. I was about to leave, and I was all packed up in my little Honda Civic. And my dad walked up, and he was like, "Yeah, I really don't want you to go." Like, and he'd been telling me this, but he was like, "I think it's a huge mistake that you're going." And ironically, I went, and yeah, for the first 6 months, I had trouble, but I broke free. Like when I say I had trouble, like I didn't have a lot of money. I was working through my own battles, but after 6 months, I made it because I went against the grain of what I was being told to do. And if I remember as well, my older sister, she didn't move as far, she moved to Eastern Kentucky. But when she did that like 4 or 5 years ago, my dad had the same response. I really don't want you to go. I don't think it's safe. Da, 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 even though he's from where she moved to. And I just found it interesting because like this wasn't just me. It had happened with multiple people in my family if they had decided to leave. And I just maybe did it a little bit more dramatically. But when I left, like I did everything they didn't think I could do. And that was because I went against, right, the generational trauma. I was breaking free from that. You need to stay here and do what you're told, and going out there and making it on my own. And I honestly don't know if that's something they didn't like, but that's what happened. And I grew from that tremendously.
Yeah, one thing I always tell people is that when start shining your light, there's two things that are going to happen. Firstly, you're going to light the path for others who want to follow in your footsteps, right? And so you kind of give permission to people, you show them the way. But the other thing is that more light equals more shadow. And so our light then highlights where other people are playing small. Now, I want to talk about what happens when we start setting these boundaries, because the thing is that we're making the decision to change, right? We've already started pulling friends and family and those closest to us out of their comfort zone. But now we're going to start raising our standards, right? Raising our tolerance. Like, I'm not going to tolerate certain behaviors anymore. I'm not going to, tolerate certain actions or patterns or whatever. And this is where it really gets interesting when, and I see this a lot with people who say to their parents, like, hey, I'm not repeating this old pattern anymore. What tends to happen is, number one, the other person goes into victim mode, right? And they become the victim of, I haven't done anything wrong here. They typically go into, there's usually a guilt trip attached to it as well. I did the best that I could. I have done so much for you. I have, I provided for you all these years, which is a really funny argument to me, because it's like Chad didn't ask to be born. Right? He hasn't asked us to give him the toys and the adventures and the things that we've given him. We've decided to do that because we think that's the best way to raise him. So I would never hold it against him as a kid. Like, look at all these things I've done for you. Well, I did them because that's what I thought was best and what I wanted to do, but he was never asking me for it. Right.
Not to mention, like, it's our responsibility as parents.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's what we're supposed to provide in the best way we know how for him. Same as what I should believe should have been happening for us and beyond.
Yeah. And I do believe that parents do the best that they can with the resources and knowledge that they have. But when you start setting boundaries with somebody who is not yet willing to A, do their own work, B, take any accountability, right? In healing, there is this duality, this double truth that you have to accept. And that's this understanding that our parents did the best that they could with the resources and knowledge that they had. For the most part, they are all good people, and they were taking action motivated by love, right? We can love them, we can know that they're good people, and the other side of the duality is to acknowledge that some of our needs didn't get met. I know that regardless of what I do for Chad, regardless of how perfect of a mom I'm going to be, I'm still going to let him down in some ways because I'm human, and it's part of his experience, right? This isn't justifying any crappy behavior, but it's part of his experience to figure out how to navigate that and overcome that. But when we have, and I feel like it's really our parents' generation that were raised with this belief in this pattern of you don't talk back to your parents. You always have to accept your parents because they're your parents and they can do no wrong, even if they do wrong. That now, really the millennials have access to different information, different data, different facts, right? There's been massive leaps in science to say, like, some of these things aren't so good, that it takes a very special person to be able to hear, you let me down here, and I'm asking you to take accountability so that we can move forward for the sake of our relationship, or I'm just asking you to acknowledge my feelings. And so what I want people to be prepared for is that there is likely going to be a period of time where they don't understand, where they might push back. I've had clients who go to set boundaries with their parents, and their parents tell them that I'm the devil because I am encouraging them. And half the time, I don't even encourage them to set the boundary, right? We just clear out the emotional baggage, we regulate the nervous system, and they decide on their own free will, this is a boundary I need to set to keep my peace with my mom or with my dad or whoever. But what's interesting is I'm always the one that gets blamed. Oh, this therapist or this person that you're going to see is the devil. You should stop seeing them. How dare they tell you that you should cut out your family? And that's why I started saying I've never, or in very few cases, have I ever advocated no contact. But it's easier to blame someone else than it is to take ownership and to realize, because a lot of people in today's society think that taking accountability is the same as taking the blame. And they're two totally different things. Blame is full of shame. It's full of you're not good enough, where accountability and taking ownership, taking responsibility is saying it's your responsibility. It's saying, this behavior was wrong, not I'm wrong, not I'm a bad person, just this behavior was not okay. This behavior was bad, instead of making it who they are. And I think the more people that understand that difference, the better. And the more people that start breaking cycles and just having the awareness that you're likely going to be guilt tripped, the other person's likely going to play the victim. And then the other thing that happens is they start to throw back, well, what about all the things that you've done to me?
Well,
right. And it becomes
me. I mean, that's what's happened.
And it becomes this tit for tat that is incredibly unproductive. And so I think knowing this, people can be better prepared for breaking the cycle because it's not going to come as such a shock.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit a lot of nails there. I say nails on the head or whatever, head on nails, whatever it's called. But yeah, just taking what you're saying and like putting it into the situation that you and I went through. I mean, like, literally have had people in my family that had, for no reason whatsoever, have just like cut us out. Like we had nothing to do with it. Like cut us out. Like we reached out to try to talk to people and then we were cut out. So I think, at the end of the day, you almost like you say it's setting boundaries, which obviously I know you're right. I also look at it as creating like, creating foundations, or I'm looking for the word here, but like creating basically what you allow to happen in your life and
Standards, what
standards.
you
Yeah.
tolerate.
Yeah. So like, for me, I got to a point to where it was kind of like I looked at all these negative things that were happening and I was, finally started to realize that like this was what I was being taught. And the people that I was around, right, probably recognized it as well, even though I didn't. And again, like I think one thing that's very, very important here, because you talked about blame versus shame and you talked about responsibility and all that. I think it's very, very important for all of us to remember that no matter what situation that we're ever put in, and like I've had to take a long look at this, but it's like no matter what situation we're ever put in, not saying we're at fault, but there's always something that we can improve on. Always. Like there's always something that we can go out there and could have done a different way to get a different result. And even though I know like we do a lot of we've done some talking on here about like what my family did and all that stuff, like I still take a look at that and I'm like, what could I have done better? And I'm
He
not just
actually has asked me that question so many times. Like, where could I have done something different in this?
And I'm not just talking about like in the heat of it, like, over the past couple of years. And, I mean, Tiffany, you know this, but I mean, like, what was it? It's 4 or 5 years ago. I was ready to cut them out based on knowing of some of the stuff that was going on, and we never did. Right. But at the end of the day, like, I look well beyond that. Like, what could I have done better at this age or at that age? And like, there's so many things that I probably had done that were not okay. And I think being able to not only admit that, but being able to look back and say, okay, like here's where I can improve has helped me improve because I'm looking at myself and I'm like, okay, like that's not okay, that's not okay, that's not okay. And it almost emotionally like let go of like making mistakes and being like, it's okay. Like I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to be the best that I can be every single day and to get better every single day. And I always talk to people about getting 1% better. And that's not something that I ever created, but it's something that I heard and learned at a very young age. And has really stuck with me because I know I can look back and say, I made a mistake here, but I know if I don't make that mistake again and I aim to do better the next time, that I will get better. And I think like when we can consistently do that for ourselves, a lot of this stuff that, emotionally where I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like like I'm not worthy or, like I'm not even, good enough for my family, which is a thought that I used to have because I was so attached to them. I can almost kind of take a look at myself and yes, my family in the grand scheme of things, they're my family and I appreciate that and I should never take them for granted. But on the other side of that thing, it's kind of like, well, I have my own standards and they should not take me for granted. And, like I should be able to go out there and have my own thoughts, my own beliefs, obviously within reason, like, like not anything unethical or crazy, but I should be able to go out there and like be myself and shine my own light without them trying to stop that. And it consistently happened for me over and over again. And I think that was why, for me, it's like when I finally developed the standards that I knew that I believed in and the things that I thought needed to happen, not only in my life, but now as a dad and as a husband, that was really what, pushed me to the edge of like, this has got to change. And the only way I'm going to get it to change is if I put my foot down. And I think like that was what did it for me.
Absolutely. So now that you know what to expect, it's time to start to prepare the nervous system for letting go of the old stuff. And so where do we recommend people start, Sid?
Well, I think we look at the nervous system and we realize that, you've mentioned the nervous system here and being able to regulate the nervous system, getting your nervous system is your electronic circuit tied to the brain. So that means it has a lot to do with the emotions and the repetitive patterns of emotions that we feel. So by regulating it or what we call resetting it, you're giving yourself the opportunity to go and start to heal, essentially. You're giving yourself the opportunity to go out there and okay, I got my nervous system or my electrical circuit to a point to where I can control my emotions enough to be able to go out there and make change, begin healing, begin getting rid of childhood trauma, and taking the steps toward really redeveloping who you are, identity wise, as well as what you're able to accomplish and what you want to accomplish in this world. So, we do it by resetting the nervous system, and you would call it a 7-day nervous system reset. There's 7 exercises to be able to do that in less than 10 minutes a day. And you can go grab that not only in the description or in the show notes, but you can go grab it at resetmysystem.com/reset.
Thank you all so much for joining us for today's episode. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode and interview that's going to blow your mind. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe, leave us a 5-star written review, and share it with someone that you think needs to hear it. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Cycle Breakers. This channel is dedicated to giving you the tools that you need to clear out the blocks holding you back so you can live the life that you desire. Now, before you go, as our special gift to you, we have our 7-day nervous system reset. These are the exact exercises that I give all of our clients in every single one of our programs to help them regulate their nervous system, to make that inner work and clearing out those mental blocks so much easier. The best part, it's absolutely free. Just click on the link in the description below and you'll get instant access.